Hi, welcome to our YouTube channel, and in today's video we'll highlight the occlusal aspect of maxillary first premolar. As per the schedule which we released on Sunday, we'll focus on maxillary first premolar, and in a separate video we'll deal with mandibular first premolar occlusal aspect as well. And before I start, how are you guys? How is life treating you these days? And one of the things which I wanted to highlight, and which is my personal favorite, is the word observation. Observation is very much important, not just in order to learn something academically, but also to survive in the real world out there. In fact, through intent observation, through keen observation, we can learn many things, and in a way, it also helps us enhance our situational awareness. Now, keeping that aside, observe the illustration which is given here very deeply with a keen intent, and I'm sure you can deduce many points in the process, which we'll try to unearth in the process of this discussion. So as I said, we'll focus on the occlusal aspect of maxillary first premolar. We have the following illustration, and first and foremost, what are the first or initial impressions that we get when we look into this illustration? You can see it has roughly 6 sides or hexagonal in shape, and these 6 sides, obviously they're not equal in length, right? So the 6 sides include the following, as you can see: mesiobuccal side, mesial side, mesolingual side, lingual side, distolingual side, distal side, and distobuccal side. So these 6 sides are definitely not equal. However, if you closely observe, the two buccal sides, that is the mesiobuccal and distobuccal, are almost equal, almost, if not exactly. And also you can see that the mesial side is somewhat shorter than the distal side, relatively speaking. And also you can see that the mesolingual side is a bit shorter than the distolingual side. So these are some of the initial impressions that we get. And if you observe deeply, you can even catch up to these lengths and sizes. And along with that, if you see, like for suppose, let's assume that this is the surface, and if I draw a curvature, and we call the height of this curvature as crest, right? Now let's observe the crests. You can see here, this is a ridge, a buccal ridge, this is lingual ridge, and this is a mesial contact area, and this is distal contact area. And along these 4 sides, you can see crests, or the highest points on that particular curvature. So in case of buccal ridge, you can see a pointed area here. So this is the crest on the buccal ridge. Similarly, on the lingual ridge, you have a crest in this area. On the mesial contact area, this is the crest we have, and on the distal contact area, we have the following crest. Now, if you keenly observe the crests, you can clearly notice that the crest on the buccal ridge is somewhat distal compared to the crest of the lingual ridge. If you draw a straight line, right, you can see that the crest of the buccal ridge is somewhat distal compared to the crest of the lingual ridge. Similarly, if you observe the mesial and distal crests which are there on the contact areas, the distal crest is somewhat buccal compared to the mesial crest, right? So these are again some of the initial impressions which we can make out by intent observation. And along with that, what else can we deduce from the occlusal surface? And even if you still probe deeper, if you still observe deeper, the finite details I'm talking about, observe the lengths. You can see that the distance between the buccal crest and mesial crest is longer compared to the distance between the buccal crest and the distal crest, right? And also you can see that the distance between the mesial crest and lingual crest is shorter compared to the distance between the lingual crest and the distal crest. Additional points. And also somewhat additional initial impressions which we can make out is, if you look into the size and shape of the crown seems to be elongated, or the length of the crown seems to be more buccolingually than mesodistally. Isn't that the case? And also if you see the width of the crown seems to be more on the buccal side compared to the lingual side, right? So these are again some of the initial impressions we can make. And if you go and probe deeper, you can see this outline area here. So the outline area of the occlusal surface of the crown is circumscribed, right? It is kind of outlined by the crests and ridges which are made by these cusps located on the occlusal surface. So here you can see we have two cusps, right? A buccal cusp and lingual cusp. So you have this distobuccal cusp ridge, mesobuccal cusp ridge, mesial ridge, that is mesial marginal ridge, and then you have your mesolingual cusp ridge, and then distolingual cusp ridge, and then you have this distal marginal ridge, right? So the point here is this entire occlusal area is circumscribed by this ridges, cusp ridges as well as marginal ridges. And if you see these mesobuccal and distobuccal cusp ridges, they are almost in line. However, the distobuccal cusp ridge is somewhat buccal compared to the mesobuccal cusp ridge in its orientation. And also you can see that the mesial ridge and the distal ridge, the marginal ridges I am talking about, are in confluence or are in continuity with the distolingual and mesolingual cuspal ridges, forming a semicircular outline. And also if you see the angle of convergence between the mesobuccal cusp ridge and the mesial marginal ridge, it is almost 90 degrees, that is right angle. However, the angle of convergence between the distobuccal cusp ridge and the distal marginal ridge is less than 90, or in other words acute in nature, right? And along with that, on top of it, you can also notice a very prominent central groove or central developmental groove, and this central developmental groove extends from almost from the marginal ridge on the mesial side towards the marginal ridge on the distal side, and this is the main central developmental groove. And additionally, most importantly, we have another collateral groove, which is mesial marginal developmental groove, extending onto the marginal ridge and even extends onto the mesial side of the crown. So this is mesial marginal developmental groove. This is a central developmental groove, whereas this is mesial marginal developmental groove. And along with that, you have other collateral grooves such as mesobuccal developmental groove and distobuccal developmental groove. And along the junction of these mesobuccal developmental grooves and the central groove, that is in this area, and also along the junction of this distobuccal developmental groove and the central developmental groove, that is in this area, you will find deeper areas called as pits, mesial pit and distal pit respectively. And we also have fossas, a triangular fossa which is distal to the mesial marginal ridge, which is called as mesial triangular fossa. And likewise we also have a distal triangular fossa. And on top of it, finally, we have these triangular ridges, buccal triangular ridge. A triangular ridge is a kind of extension from the central aspect of the occlusal surface, that is from the central groove towards the cusp tip. So this is a central groove we have, and this is a central aspect, and from this area you can see a triangular ridge converging onto the buccal cusp tip. And this buccal triangular ridge is more prominent compared to the lingual triangular ridge. And when you look into the cusp tips, buccal cusp tip and lingual cusp tip, lingual cusp tip is usually pointed compared to the buccal cusp tip, which I'm sure all of you know. And when you observe the tooth occlusally, so that your line of vision is along the long axis of the tooth, as in this case, you can see most of the buccal surface compared to the lingual surface. And when you look into the same tooth mesially, the buccal cusp seems to be more towards the center of the root trunk compared to the lingual cusp tip, as you can see in the illustration which is presented here, right? So these are some of the areas or key points related to the occlusal aspect of maxillary first premolar. In the process, we have seen a lot of information, right? And you need not mug up any of this information, trust me when I say this, you need not mug it up at all. All you need to do is observe the illustration, observe the outline, observe the diagram, observe the natural tooth carefully, practice the illustrations on a piece of paper as many times as possible, and then when you're reading theory or when you're watching this video, simultaneously observe the illustration, and once it gets registered in your mind, it's going to be there forever, or at least till the date of exam. For sake of your satisfaction, I'm saying this, but the reality is it's going to be there in your mind forever. And next time before exam, all you need to do is just brush up, look into these key points or observe the illustration once again, and that will help you refresh your entire memory, right? So these are some of the key points related to the occlusal aspect of maxillary first premolar. And before I conclude, let me summarize all the important points that I have discussed so far. So as you can see, the initial impressions, you can see a six-sided hexagonal outlined tooth. So the six sides include mesobuccal side, mesial side, mesolingual side, distolingual side, distal side, and distobuccal side. Six sides. Even though it is six-sided, they are not equal in length or equal in dimension. You can clearly see that even though roughly the buccal sides are almost equal, mesial side is relatively shorter than the distal side, and mesolingual side is shorter than the distolingual side. And along with that, we have seen the orientation of the crests. A crest is nothing but the height of a curvature, right? So you can see the buccal crest, the crest which is there on the buccal ridge, right? So the buccal crest is somewhat distal compared to the lingual crest. Similarly, distal crest, which is present on the distal contact area, is somewhat buccal to the orientation compared to the level of the mesial crest. And along with that, we have also seen the lengths, like the distance between the buccal crest and mesial crest is longer compared to the distance between buccal crest and distal crest. And also the distance between the mesial and lingual crest is shorter compared to the distance between the distal and lingual crest. And along with that, we have also seen that the crown is more wider buccolingually than mesodistally, and when it comes to the width of the crown, it is more bulkier on the buccal side and it narrows down as we move on towards the lingual side or towards the lingual aspect. And on the occlusal surface, you can see confluence of various cusp ridges and marginal ridges. So the cusp ridges include mesobuccal cusp ridge, distobuccal cusp ridge, mesolingual cusp ridge, distolingual cusp ridge. It's very simple. The ridges are named based on the location, depending on the side they are located in, right? So these cuspal ridges and the mesial and marginal and distal marginal ridges are in confluence, and if you closely observe, this distobuccal cusp ridge is somewhat buccal compared to the mesobuccal cusp ridge, and the rest of the cusp ridges are in confluence, forming giving a semicircular outline, and the convergence of the mesobuccal cusp ridge and the mesial marginal ridge is right angled 90 degrees, whereas the convergence between the distobuccal cusp ridge and the distal marginal ridge is less than 90 approximately, so we call it as acute angulated. And along with that, we have a prominent central developmental groove which divides the crown almost equally in buccolingual plane, and you have this central developmental groove, and you also have this mesial marginal developmental groove which is extending onto the mesial marginal ridge and even going on to the mesial surface of the crown, which is very, very important. You have the depression, right? And piggyback wedging, which we discuss in conservative, has something to do with this. And along with that, we also have this collateral ridges, collateral grooves, that is not ridges, collateral grooves, which are mesobuccal developmental groove as well as distobuccal developmental groove. And these collateral grooves, when they join the central developmental groove, the junction is deeper and they form pits, which are nothing but mesial pit and distal pit respectively. And also we have these fossas or concave areas or depressions just distal to the mesial marginal ridge and mesial to the distal marginal ridge, and these are called as triangular fossa. So you have mesial triangular fossa and distal triangular fossa respectively. And finally, when it comes to triangular ridges, so triangular ridges are elevations which are kind of, starting from the central aspect of the developmental group, which is located in the central portion of the crown, and then extending on to the cusp tip. So this buccal triangular ridge, when you observe the tooth, is more prominent than the lingual triangular ridge. And when compared to both the cusps, like when you observe buccal cusp as well as lingual cusp is usually more pointed, right? So this is in brief the occlusal aspect of maxillary first premolar. I hope it's clear. And if you have any queries or you need any further assistance, you can always reach out to us through mail at proudtobedentist@gmail.com, right? I hope you enjoyed attending this session, and I hope you learned something in the process. And before I conclude, again, the key lies in our observation, not in mugging up things, not in by-hearting things. Observe intently, observe keenly, and once it gets registered in your mind, you're never ever going to forget it for this lifetime. So wish you all the best. Love you all.